I think one of our crosses to bear as humans is that we tend to think far more about our mess-ups, our failures, than our successes. When we mess up in relationships, at school, at work, we tend to wrestle with it internally. We might write about it in our journals, and we sometimes tell our friends and family about it. And if we allow ourselves, our mess-ups can be an opportunity to get it right and try better next time. The same is true for how we approach messing up diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. I'll say that as DEIB for short. I am a DEIB strategist who mostly works with nonprofit organizations. I decided to focus on this topic because I want my communities to be places where we can all learn and hear from one another. And what I've seen all along the way, so much transformation and growth, even in the midst of not getting it right all the time. What happens when we mess up? And when we open ourselves up, without defense, to learning? When we can be open to messing up DEIB, we open ourselves up to growing in ways that we might not expect, to build and rebuild relationships so that we can forge a new path. Don't worry, I don't plan to give you a DEIB workshop today. We hear about what that means on the news, and I understand the very concepts may make you uncomfortable, may bring to mind a poorly facilitated training, or make you think that it actually excludes some types of individuals. I actually think DEIB work is work for all of us to do, and helps all of us have a better human experience. I'd like to share with you now what I think DEIB means, and tell you that more likely than not, you are going to mess it up. We all are. When I say diversity, I mean a fancy word for difference. That is it. We can be diverse in many types of our social identities, right? We can be diverse in our hair color, our eye color, our skin color, right? We can even be diverse in how tall we are. So like, obviously, I didn't win the tall lottery. When I say equity, I mean the ability to all get what we need in order to fulfill our full potential. And what I may need may be different from what you may need. But the point is that we all get what we need in order to make it and to be successful. When I say inclusion, I mean actively creating an environment in which all people's voices, particularly those who have been historically underrepresented, are heard, appreciated, and valued. And then when I say belonging, to me that takes this idea of inclusion a step further. It's like, instead of asking me to join a conversation at an event, it's more like asking me for my favorite songs so that I can put them on the playlist for the event, right? It's making sure that I'm eager to go out there and jam on the dance floor. In other words, it's asking me to play a role in the very design of the thing that we're co-creating. When I was 5 years old, we moved into a neighborhood on a small block, and we quite possibly were the first African Americans on that block. And not long after we moved in, our house was egged by the sons of the neighbors 3 houses down. And not long after that, when my mom locked herself out of her house and the fire department came, it was only after she was validated by her white neighbor that they allowed her back into her home. I've seen exclusion and DEIB mess-ups up close. And you know what? I've also seen inclusion close up too. I think that people are mostly good by nature, and that these ideas of inclusion and belonging come inherently to us as humans. It is a basic human need to feel like we're valued, that we're safe, that we matter, and that we belong. And I believe because we are humans with all our frailties, sometimes we mess things up. From my personal experiences as a leader and from those of some of my clients over the last several years, I'm glad to share with you today several lessons about how you can really mess things up as it pertains to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I share this information with you so that you won't make these mistakes. But you know what? You'll quite possibly make some new ones. So the first way to mess up DEIB is to play it too safe. When we try too hard to not hurt anyone's feelings, we may play it too safe. And that usually means that someone else's needs are not being met. we understand fully that if we play it safe and we stay silent when we should speak up, that is not a neutral action, that is an action that absolutely harms those with less power and less privilege. I was working with an organization not long ago that had an employee that, although they said all the right things, they actually were harming some of the staff members of color. And because that employee was very close to people of power, and very loved by some, very good at their job, you might imagine that that organization was reluctant to let that employee go. The situation came to an eruption at a meeting. Then leadership was forced to act. You can imagine it got a little ugly. That person did exit the institution, but I always thought that if some smaller issues were confronted, even a year earlier, that the difficult parting at the end could have been lessened or avoided. The organization thought they were playing it safe. Let's wait out the person, hoping they'd leave it their own. And that plan fell apart. Although that person may have fulfilled their work responsibilities, they did not uphold the organization's desire for an inclusive environment. Now, you might say, hey, when we're talking about someone's livelihood, that we should act cautiously, that that's a big deal. I would usually agree. And I would argue that holding that employee for that last year didn't help them and didn't help the organization either. It, again, was not a neutral act. Harm was done to multiple people throughout that year. I bet we can all think of a situation where someone stayed a bit too long. Other ways that we mess up DEIB is we may go too fast or too slow, right? It seems so logical to think, I'll go slow, I'll make incremental changes, and then I won't mess up. I wish that was true, right? But guess what? Still messing it up. That's okay. Stick with me here. I told you that that was a good thing. I've learned in my DEIB journey that it's important when you're working with a new organization to get to the very top, that is, the senior leadership and the very head of the institution, as soon as you can. Would you believe I worked with the organization for almost 3 years and never once talked to anyone in the C-suite? We talked about it multiple times. I did more than 30 presentations there, but never once talked to anyone in the C-suite. The delay in getting that important information to the top translated as a lack of commitment to the initiatives, right? How could the organization move forward with people at lower levels really energized and thoughtful about the DEIB journey, but people at higher levels not as engaged, behind the learning curve, right? I've been there before, and the impact is that when people and decision makers seem not as engaged in learning about DEIB, that it feels like a lower priority as compared to other workflows. And that DEIB is a fad that's gonna fade when the issues are no longer in the news. Sometimes, instead, we move too fast. I'll give you an example. In college, I took a history class. And I don't remember what happened, but I went to the history teacher after class, and it was clear that she thought I came from an impoverished background, that I needed extra help. I remember she gave me actually most of the history books for the class, which I appreciated because that meant that I had more money for pizzas and all the things that college freshmen buy that don't involve supporting their academics. But then I thought about it, and it was clear to me that she was making some assumptions about me based on my skin color. And when I thought about that, it didn't feel great. What she didn't know, in fact, is that I came from a pretty middle-class background. My dad is a physician. My mom ran a nonprofit. I think we're quick to think all kinds of things about what our backgrounds are like, how much knowledge we have, how much money we have in our bank accounts. We are fast to make a lot of assumptions about each other. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts are not an exercise in perfectionism. Far from it. It's an exercise in trying some things, having some things fail, having some hurt feelings on many sides. Instead of us walking through that failure, we may play it too safe. Or we make moves, but those moves are mistimed, either too fast or too slow. So you may think, how can I get over that, right? How can I, that might be a hard sell, that sometimes, we may not understand and think about what we want to do in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I've thought a lot about why people fear going down the DEIB path so much. And the answer I'll leave you with is actually twofold. We're afraid that we'll lose face and afraid that we might damage relationships forever. Does this sound familiar? We all need to feel like we have a good standing in the eyes of others and a good standing and valued ourselves. I've seen and acknowledged in my own life that relationships, conversations, decision-making are all made better when we have diverse perspectives and ways of thinking and lived opportunities at the table. What should we do, right? So I'm particularly vested in the mess-ups and the repair of these mistakes because I'm well aware that now I'm a middle-aged woman. My legs and my feet tell me this most days. I'm also a mother, and so I know that I'm hopeful that this next generation will learn from our mistakes and will find a new path forward. My daughter asked me the other day why I do this work, knowing how frustrating it can be. And I said it's because I want to see a difference in all of my communities. And I want to make sure her children and her children's children are never feel like they can't do something because of their gender or their sexual orientation or their race. The only way to remain hopeful in doing this work is to embrace the mess-ups, embrace the course corrects, and embrace the lessons. So I'd like to ask you a question today, because I know that you want a more inclusive world for your friends, your family, and your community. What can you do today to try a new way to foster inclusion, even if you fail? I'll end with one last story. My dad is an expert gardener, and he pays attention very closely to his soil. He has trained me to bring banana peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, to make sure that his soil is in good shape so that when he plants his flowers, that they bloom. And we humans are very much like those flowers my dad's planting, and that we also need the right environment, the right nutrients, the right amount of nitrogen, sun, and water, all those things to make it and to grow. And you know what? Some of the time we don't get it right, but that's okay. There's always another year, and there's always another harvest. There's always another opportunity to get it right and to learn from our mistakes. We need to look forward to messing it up. This is how we move forward.